In this video, we're going to be talking about supply. As usual, if you find these videos useful, please like and subscribe and share them with your friends, classmates, and colleagues. And if you have a suggestion for further videos, leave a comment down below. Okay, so supply. If you've watched the demand video, which I suggest that you do before watching this video, right? It'll be lesson 8, demand. You'll notice that essentially this video almost perfectly parallels that one. If you understand demand, you should understand supply. Okay, the logic is obviously different because we're talking about the producer side of things now, right? But the I would say the underlying theory is extremely similar. Okay, so I'm going to try to go through this material maybe a little bit more quickly than I did the demand material. But again, I would recommend watching that video first. Okay, so as in the previous video, we're going to talk about something called the law of, but instead of the law of demand, of course, now we'll be talking about the law of supply. Law of supply. Now, I'm not sure if this term is as widely used as the law of demand, but the law of supply is essentially the exact opposite of the law of demand, right? All else being equal, ceteris paribus, when the price of a good increases, then suppliers want to supply more of that good. So the quantity supplied will go up. Why do suppliers, or firms rather, want to supply more of that good? Well, if the price has gone up, that means that, again, ceteris paribus, so production costs have stayed the same, right? It hasn't become more expensive to produce the good, but the price has gone up, right? So that means that profit per unit sold will be higher, and so therefore the firm, all else being equal, will want to supply more of it. Okay, so as price goes up, quantity supplied goes up, and of course the converse is that as when price goes down, quantity supplied will also go down. So of course, this will result in a supply curve that is not downward sloping, but of course upward sloping, right? We want, if the law of supply is to be followed, that whenever the price of a good increases, so does the quantity, right? So this is exactly what we get with a curve like this. Let's say we start at P1, okay? At P1, the quantity supplied, according to this supply curve, will be Q1, right? And if P1 happens to increase, say, to P2, then quantity will also increase to Q2, right? This increase in price results in an increase in quantity supplied, okay? So, as we did in our demand video, we will make a distinction now between quantity supplied and supply, rather. So, quantity supplied is simply these quantities down here on the x-axis. It's the amount that firms want to produce and sell at every price, okay? And what causes a shift or a change in quantity supplied? A change in price. When prices change, we have movements along the supply curve, ceteris paribus, right? Every point on the supply curve represents a price and a quantity, so therefore the thing that can make the quantity change is a change in price. But as we had with demand, there are also events that can cause a shift in the entire supply curve, right? So, first thing, what causes a change in quantity supplied or a movement along the supply curve? A change in price. That's it. Now, what causes a shift in the entire supply curve? Well, again, many things. But in this video, we're going to talk about 6 of the big ones. So, let's draw our supply curve. Okay, what can cause a shift in the supply curve? Well, the first thing is a change in the price of inputs. So what is an input? Well, an input is simply anything that anything. So that could be it could be labor, it can be raw material, it could be a finished product from another company. Any item, or well, it doesn't even have to be an item. It's really anything that goes into the production of a good. Okay, so what are the inputs in sandwich production? Well, there's the labor that's put in by the people who actually make the sandwiches, right? There's the bread, there's the meat, there are the condiments, etc. Anything that goes, so the firm has to pay for all of those things and then use them to make the sandwiches, which it then sells to consumers, right? So those are inputs. So of course, if inputs, say, get more expensive, okay, so let's say the price of inputs increases, well, then there's less profit to be made per unit, right? So if lettuce gets more expensive, if meat gets more expensive, if for whatever reason wages go up, well, now it's more expensive to produce our sandwiches, so there'll be less profit per unit. So that means that at every price of a sandwich, right, the supplier or the firm will want to sell less of it, right? So let's say the price of sandwiches were P1 to begin with, okay? And of course, we have some quantity supplied that corresponds to P1. Well, as soon as the price of inputs goes up, the supplier will want to, the firm will want to supply less of it, right? So let's say that now the firm only wants to supply Q2. And of course, this will be the same at every price, right? If the price of the sandwich were P2, you'd also have a leftward shift in quantity supplied. If the price were P3, same thing, right? So at every price, okay, an increase in the price of inputs causes a decrease in quantity supplied, which of course results in a leftward shift of our supply curve, right? Now, of course, if price were to decrease, right, the price of inputs were to decrease, well, then there would be more profit to be made on every unit sold, and so you would have a rightward shift in our supply curve. All right? Okay, let's go on to our second kind of event, which can cause a shift. Oh, I seem to be unable not to erase my whole graph every time. So bear with me. Okay. The second kind of event that can cause a shift in the entire supply curve is a change in technology. So we're going to talk about technology and how it influences production in a lot more detail later on. Okay, but now suffice it to say that let's just take let's take an extremely basic intuitive situation. So in the year 1950, okay, producing cars demanded a lot more manual labor than it now does, okay? Nowadays, we have robots producing cars, okay? So that's an improvement in technology. Why is the robot good for car production? Well, it means that there are fewer inputs for every car, right? Fewer man hours, okay? Less time, because the robot could probably produce the cars faster than humans can. Of course, there's no fully automated car production factory yet. There are still some humans there, but you get the point. Fewer people, less time. Okay, so that's so because of that technological improvement, namely the invention of really cool robots that can help us in producing cars, there are fewer inputs that go into every car produced, right? So the car can be made faster, more efficiently, etc. Okay, so therefore there's more profit to be made per car. Why? Because the fewer inputs that go into the production process, the cheaper it is to make a car. Okay, so that means that when technology improves, right, profit per unit sold should also go up. So we should see a rightward shift in quantity supplied at every price. Okay, so when technology improves, we see a rightward shift in the supply curve, right, which just means more produced at every price. And if for whatever reason, okay, there was some huge natural disaster or nuclear war, something catastrophic like that, and our technology actually decreased in quality, well, then of course we would see a leftward shift in our supply curve. All right, so that is technology. The third one is government taxes or subsidies. Okay, this one I think might be quite intuitive, okay? If the government taxes, say, the sale of cars, let's stick to our car example. So for every car sold, the company has to pay a certain amount of their profit in tax, right? Or if there's a sales tax that has to be paid by the consumer, or if corporate taxes simply go up such that profits get eaten into by the amount that has to be paid in taxes, well then of course that's just a decrease in profit. Okay, so standard economic theory would tell us that okay, there's less of an incentive now to produce cars, so that would of course be represented by a leftward shift in the supply curve. Okay. So this is a long-winded way of saying tax is bad, okay? And this would be a good place to flag that, of course, the effects of taxes are a lot more complicated than your intro to economics course would have you believe, but this is a very, very simplified model, okay? In the very simple model that we're exploring, okay, taxes that must be paid by the firm simply mean that profits are lower. Okay, so the incentive to produce is lower, supply shifts to the left. Okay, now subsidies are just negative taxes. Okay, they're just money paid to the firm by the government. Let's say the government says, okay, for whatever reason, okay, it's too expensive right now to produce cars, or not enough cars are being produced. We're going to subsidize the production of cars. We're going to actually pay firms to produce cars. Well, then, of course, the firm has a massive incentive to increase production. Okay, so the supply curve would shift to the right in the presence of subsidies. Okay, you can think of taxes and subsidies as just opposites of one another. Right? A tax is money being taken away by the government. A subsidy is money being given by the government. And of course, when I say given and taken away, I mean to the firm, right? To the producer. Okay? Fourth, we have the prices of other products, just as we did in the case of demand. Okay, so if you remember, in the case of demand, we had substitutes and complements in production, in consumption rather. Well, we have the same thing here, complements and substitutes in production. Okay, so let's make a little table as we did in our previous video. So we have, let's start with substitutes. So we have substitutes in production. So notice that on the demand side, we're talking about substitutes and complements in consumption, whereas when we're talking about supply, we're talking about substitutes and complements in production. So complements in production. Okay, so do not confuse the price of inputs with the price of other products, okay? When we're talking about the price of inputs, we're talking about the prices that firms have to pay to buy the things they need to produce their product, okay? When we're talking about the price of other products, we're talking about finished products, okay? Not products that go into producing something else. Products that are actually finished and sold by the firm. These are two very different things. The price of inputs is paid by the firm when they buy those inputs. The price of other products are paid by consumers when the firms sell it to them. Okay, so these are very different things. Do not confuse these two. Okay? Okay, so substitutes in production. So let's say you have a firm that produces, they either produce bowling balls or they produce basketballs, right? Let's say this is our graph for bowling balls. Okay? So what happens when the price of, say, basketballs increases or decreases? Okay? So now we're saying that basketballs and bowling balls in our example are substitutes in production, which again means the firm will either produce one or they'll produce the other, but not both. Or at least if they do produce more of one, they will produce less of the other. Okay? They're substitutes. Okay, well, let's see what happens here. So let's say the price of PB will be the price of basketballs. Okay, let's say the price of basketballs increases. What does the law of supply tell us? Well, it tells us that the firm will now want to supply more basketballs. Okay, so the price of basketballs goes up. Therefore, the firm wants to supply more basketballs. But since they're supplying more basketballs, they will now want to supply less bowling balls at every price. So basketballs will be B, bowling balls will, let's call it O, okay? So the supply of bowling balls will, of course, decrease, which will be represented by a leftward shift in the supply curve, okay? So this is for substitutes in production, okay? When the price of a substitute goes up, we have our leftward shift here in the supply curve, okay? What if the price of basketballs had decreased? Price of basketballs decreases. Well, the law of supply tells us that the quantity supplied of basketballs will therefore also decrease, causing an increase in the supply of bowling balls, which will, of course, be a rightward shift in our supply curve for bowling balls. Okay, so the logic here is basically the flip side of the logic that I went through in my previous video, which I would again encourage you to watch before watching this one when we talked about demand. Okay, so let's go through this logic one more time, and then I will quickly go through the logic of complements, which are the opposite of substitutes. Okay, so the price of bowling balls in our first example here has gone up. Okay? So because the firm is producing bowling balls, and because the price went up, there will therefore be more profit to be made on every bowling ball. So the firm will want to produce more of it. That's an increase in the quantity supplied of bowling balls. Now, again, ceteris paribus, because bowling balls and basketballs are substitutes in production for this firm, the firm will want to produce fewer bowling balls, okay? But why does the entire curve shift to the left, okay? Why is it the supply of bowling balls that goes down and not simply the quantity supplied of bowling balls? Well, again, it's because of this ceteris paribus thing. What we're saying is, let's take the price of bowling balls as a given, okay? Let's say each bowling ball are being sold for $15. Okay, well, because these are because bowling balls and basketballs are substitutes, and the quantity supplied of basketballs has gone up, the quantity supplied of bowling balls at $15 will go down. But of course, this would be true for any price of bowling balls. Okay, so there would be a decrease in the supply of in the quantity supplied of bowling balls at every price, right? Another way of saying that is there would be a decrease in the supply of bowling balls, which is, again, another way of saying that there would be a leftward shift in the supply curve for bowling balls. Okay? Of course, the logic for when a price decreases is the same, just in the opposite direction. The price of basketballs has decreased, so therefore the firm wants to supply fewer of them, and it will therefore supply more bowling balls at every price, which is represented by an increase in the supply of bowling balls or a rightward shift in the supply curve of bowling balls. All right? How about complements in production? Complements in production are simply the opposite, right? The price, let's say the price of basketballs goes up. The law, let's just erase that and that. Okay. The law of supply tells us that when the price of basketballs increases, okay, the quantity supplied of basketballs also increases. But now basketballs and bowling balls are complements in production. Okay? It's not that firms substitute between them, it's that they produce them together. Okay? So now why would this be the case? Well, in the case of our first firm, okay, the firm that is producing basketballs and bowling balls as substitutes, okay, you could imagine that I don't know, there are two different kinds of machines or something like that will produce each kind of ball, right? And when the firm is spending money operating one kind of machine, they're not really operating the second kind, okay, something like that. I know this basically shows that I know absolutely nothing about how bowling balls and basketballs are produced. But okay, we could just imagine this sort of toy example where you've got basketball machines and you've got bowling ball machines, and when the firm is spending money on, say, electricity and manpower to operate the basketball machines, they're not spending that money on electricity and manpower to operate the bowling ball machines, and so therefore bowling balls and basketballs are substitutes in production. But we could also imagine another kind of firm where the exact same machines are producing both bowling balls and basketballs, right? So in that case, when the firm says, all right, we're going to ramp up our production of bowling balls, we're going to ramp up our production of basketballs, that just implies that they're also going to ramp up their production of bowling balls because the same machines are producing both. Again, not a realistic example, but it makes the point. Okay, so let's return to what we were saying before that little tangent. Okay, the price of basketballs has gone up, so the law of supply tells us that the quantity supplied of basketballs has gone up. And because basketballs and bowling balls are complements for this particular firm, then the firm will produce more bowling balls at every price, right? Ceteris paribus. So the supply curve will shift to the right, okay? And then for the last case here, the price of bowling balls decreases, and the law of supply tells us that the quantity supplied of did I say bowling balls? I meant basketballs. The price of basketballs decreases, so the quantity supplied of basketballs will decrease by the law of supply, which will in turn cause a decrease in the quantity supplied of bowling balls at every price, or a decrease in supply of bowling balls, or a leftward shift in the supply curve for bowling balls. Okay, as in the case of demand, another thing that may very well cause a shift in the supply curve is a significant change in weather. Okay, easiest example here, okay, a farmer who produces wheat experiences a very, very, very bad season for weather. I don't know, unexpected snowstorms, again, this is showing that I know nothing about farming. Let's say there's an unexpected snowstorm, okay? Unexpected snowstorms, unexpected thunderstorms and rain showers, so there's a ton of flooding. Well, of course, the crop yield is going to be worse, right? So that would cause a leftward shift in the supply curve. And if the weather is particularly propitious one year, well, then our farmer will be able to produce more wheat at every price. So that would be a rightward shift in the supply curve, right? And finally, we have number of suppliers, right? So let's say, let's continue with our example of bowling ball production. If suddenly we have 10 new firms that are all producing bowling balls, well, then of course there's going to be, more bowling balls. So that would cause a rightward shift in the supply curve. If many of our bowling ball producing firms shut down because they go out of business, well, of course that will cause a leftward shift in our supply curve. Okay. Finally, we can talk about, we've already talked about it, but we will re-emphasize, right, the difference between changes in quantity supplied and changes in supply. All right. So let's illustrate that in the same way, in a very similar way as we did with our demand curve. So let's start with our upward sloping supply curve. And as in the case of demand, let's use an example. Let's use an example that will be fairly easy to understand. Let's use the example of our wheat farmer. Okay, or rather, not our wheat farmer, but the entire market for wheat. All right, so let's say there is particularly propitious weather this year. Okay, actually, let's start with some price. Okay, P1. Okay, so the price of wheat at this moment is P1, so therefore the quantity supplied at this moment is Q1, right? And now let's say that there is particularly good weather this year, and so therefore there's more wheat produced than usual. As we saw before, this would cause a rightward shift in the supply curve. So this would be our new supply curve. So this is an increase in supply, right? Rightward shift in supply curve, increase in supply, okay? So of course, at the previous price, our quantity supplied would be somewhere up here, right? It would be somewhere here, Q2. But now let's say there's a dramatic drop in the price of wheat, right? So all the way down to P2. Then, of course, on our new supply curve, our quantity supplied would actually be Q3. So that actually represents a decrease in quantity supplied. So while supply has increased, quantity supplied has decreased. Okay, so this is, again, an illustration of the difference between supply and quantity supplied. All right, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you find it useful. Leave a comment down below for further suggestions, and I will see you in our next video.